Hey everybody, I'm frankforce, also known as Killed by a Pixel. I'm a generative artist living in Austin, Texas. I'm 43 years old, and I've worked in the video game industry for most of my life. So making generative art is a way of me taking that video game experience and moving into more of a creative fine art kind of background, and using all of that technology and creative development I've learned making video games to make artwork. Growing up in the 80s in a suburb of Philadelphia, I had two brothers and a sister. I was the oldest, and I was a pretty smart kid, so I went to some of the special classes and stuff like that. But even so, school was pretty difficult for me. It was difficult in the way that I was bored out of my mind, basically. And I'm not saying I did great. I did in a lot of classes I didn't do well at all because I just was not interested at all in history or stuff like that. I would a lot of times use my calculator to program games while I was in other classes and get in trouble. But like, I didn't need to know the history of the United States. I need to know how to make games. That's what I wanted to do at the time. So that's what I did. And yeah, school was pretty tough for me. I can only imagine how difficult it is for so many other people, because for me, it was almost unbearable of just the combination of waking up super early, having depression and acne, and just feeling like I didn't fit in, and it was very stressful. But it's still, I ended up just pushing my way through it and getting to college where things opened up a little bit. I was able to meet other people a little bit more like myself, and I was able to focus on more about the things that I was interested in, like programming, science, physics, that kind of thing. So yeah, I eventually was able to escape from that. For most of my career, I've worked in the video game industry. Even when I was a kid, I decided that I wanted to make video games like very early on. I remember making like levels for Super Mario Brothers, not like actual in the game, but I would like draw them on paper. And I've always wanted to make video games. I started dabbling with games, like even in, I think middle school was where I started, but they were very, very primitive at that point. Then when I moved to high school, I got a TI-82, and I just love this thing. It's a graphing calculator. They actually use the same ones today, so you've probably seen one. And it's like a kind of like a Game Boy almost. Actually, it's the same processor as a Game Boy. And I would program in BASIC on there, making all little games. And that's kind of how I cut my teeth on video games, is making the games on my calculator. Then as I went through high school, I started learning about math and physics, and I wanted to like pursue this as a career. So I decided to go to school for computer science. Went to Rochester Institute of Technology, and then I went off to work on video games in the industry. Worked at many companies. I felt like I had to be flexible in allowing myself to travel around the country. You know, had I stayed in Philadelphia, which is where I'm from, there's really not that much going on there. So I ended up just applying like everywhere in the country to try to get a job. It's very, very difficult to get a job in the video game industry. So I applied to like hundreds of companies, only got a couple responses. My first job was in New Jersey, and I took a job there at a small video game company. They ended up picking a job at Midway Games in Chicago, and also worked in Champaign, Illinois, and eventually moved down here to Austin, Texas, where I live now. I've been here for a while, over 10 years. I've always been very interested in creating art, even like when I was a kid and I was interested in video games. I was almost more interested in the art side of things, and I nearly went to school for an art career, and maybe I still would have went into video games on the art side of things, but I ended up deciding that, especially after I was programming my calculator and learning how to program better, I decided programming Computer science was a better fit for me. But I've always loved art, creating art, and I guess it was about 15 years ago, I really got into creating abstract art, and I made a lot of it during that period of time. I was inspired by artists like Kandinsky and Paul Klee and a few others to create really non-representational abstract art. And I'm talking about not generative art. I primarily use Sharpies and crayon to create this art. I've done a lot of works. A few of them are pretty big. I did some acrylic, and I really got into this concept of non-representational abstract art. And that was kind of a big thing for at least a year or two for me. I think I was unemployed for some of that time, so I was able to really focus on it. And then as I kind of, started getting back into work and getting busy with other projects, I didn't have enough, quite as much time to work on it. But it still inspires me today with my generative art, because I can look back through all the stuff that I made and get some ideas about generative art projects to do. The project I'm working on for 256 art is inspired by something I was working on many years ago that I liked. I just always loved video games. To me, have always been like the art form of like modern times, like the art form that came into existence when I was born in the early 80s and 70s, came into existence, and it's just become a bigger and bigger part of everyone's lives. I sometimes meet people and they say they don't play video games. So I ask them what they play on their phone, what they do on their phone, and they start telling me about all these games they make on their phone or they play on their phone. So it's just becoming this thing that is so ubiquitous that people don't even realize they're playing video games. They're everywhere. And it's always been a big part of my life. It's always still a part of my generative art career. I've released at least one pretty big generative game project called Batafurico on FX Hash, which is a playable generative shooter where every single iteration of it looks and sounds different. I have a lot of other generative art ideas for video games that I want to experiment with in the future too.